George had made peace with being invisible. At 82, he'd learned to speak less, to move slower, to occupy space quietly. Most days, the nurses walked in, checked his pulse, adjusted the blankets, and left without a second glance. He didn't blame them. What did he have to offer anymore? His hands trembled, his bladder misfired, his body, once solid and confident, had become a husk of old skin and silent aches. And sex? That had ended years ago. After Mildred died, the warmth in his bed vanished. He hadn't touched another soul, not in desire, not in joy, not even in mourning. Eventually, he stopped touching himself too, not out of grief, but futility. "What's the point?" he once muttered to himself in the mirror. "Who's left to feel it for?" The mirror didn't answer. It rarely did. But one morning after a restless night, a new nurse entered his room. She wasn't especially young. Her hair was silver-streaked, her eyes sharp, her voice calm. Her name was Alina. She moved with gentle confidence, checking his vitals like all the others. But then, as she pulled the blanket up over his chest, she paused. "You know," she said softly, leaning in just enough for her words to land like a whisper, "your body still remembers how to be touched." George blinked. "What?" She smiled, not condescending, not flirtatious, just warm. "Even now, especially now, pleasure doesn't retire. Only people do." Then she walked out and left George sitting there, stunned. The phrase echoed in his bones, "Your body still remembers." No one had spoken to him like that in over 2 decades. Not his children, not his doctors, not even himself. That night, George lay in bed without sleeping. He stared at the ceiling, his hands resting over the blanket like forgotten tools. He felt a heat rise in his chest, not sexual but alive. Could it be true? Could something still be awake inside him? The next morning, he shaved for the first time in weeks. He sat upright during breakfast, and when Alina returned, he asked, "What did you mean yesterday? About remembering?" She didn't blink. "Your nerves still fire. Your hormones still respond. If you stop touching your body, stop letting it feel, it starts fading faster. We see it all the time, but the ones who stay curious, they stay alive longer." She touched his wrist, not clinically, but kindly. "Touch keeps you real," she said, "even if it's just your own." George looked down at his trembling fingers. They had built a house, carried a wife, held a baby girl. Now they sat idle, pale, veined, still waiting. He hadn't known he was waiting, but now he did. That night, he didn't rush to sleep. He sat in the dim hospital glow, and for the first time in years, he placed his hand gently over his heart and just listened. His body didn't feel dead. It felt forgotten. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was still waiting to be remembered. George hadn't touched himself in nearly 14 years. Not since Mildred's final breath. Not since the night he fell asleep gripping her pillow, the sheets still warm with her fading scent. After that, every part of him closed off. Emotionally, physically. He believed desire had a deadline, and his had long since passed. But that whisper from Alina pierced through something sealed. And now he couldn't stop thinking about it. Your body still remembers. He glanced at his hands again, wrinkled, loose-skinned. But those hands had once known how to stir pleasure. They had once traveled across someone's body with reverence. Could they still remember how? The idea wasn't arousing, it was terrifying. Like opening a door you thought was locked forever. But beneath that fear was something else. Hope. The next day, Alina returned with a folded towel and a small bottle of lavender lotion. "Your arms are tight," she said. "Let me show you something." She didn't ask. She just sat beside him and began gently rubbing the lotion into his forearms, moving slowly, not like a nurse, but like someone reminding a person they still exist. "This isn't just lotion," she said. "It's permission." George said nothing. He couldn't. His throat ached. His eyes stung. He had forgotten what kindness felt like on his skin. "You can do this for yourself too," Alina added. "Pleasure doesn't always mean climax. Sometimes it just means attention." That night, George waited until the hallway lights dimmed. Then beneath the quiet hum of the medical equipment, he reached for the lotion and placed it beside his bed. He started slowly, one hand on the other, rubbing gently, then up his forearm, over the shoulders, across his chest. The skin surprised him. It responded. He wasn't aroused. He wasn't embarrassed. He was present. And in that moment, he realized something no one had ever told him. The opposite of aging isn't youth. It's sensation. And sensation, even in small doses, was a signal to his brain. I'm still here. That's why we call this awakening the touch revival threshold. It's the moment where deliberate, caring contact, whether sexual or not, wakes up the nervous system, lowers stress hormones, increases blood flow, and reignites the body's belief in its own worth. Studies from geriatric psychology journals confirm it. Seniors who maintain gentle sensual practices, even solo, report better emotional stability, sharper memory, lower inflammation, and longer life expectancy. But George didn't need a study. He needed only what was unfolding within him. Later that night, he placed both hands on his chest and let out a long, trembling exhale. He whispered, I forgot how to feel. But now, piece by piece, he was remembering. George had started sleeping better, not because of pills, not because of a new mattress, but because his body no longer felt abandoned. Every night now, he gave it some small act of care, a slow stroke across the forearm, a warm hand over his chest, a whisper to himself that he was still alive. And every morning he woke with something unfamiliar, calm. His appetite had returned. He no longer stared at his breakfast like it was a chore. He greeted the nurses. He brushed his hair. He even began humming an old melody Mildred used to love. The other residents noticed. Something different about you, George, one said. He smiled. I started listening to myself. Because that's what this was, listening. Not to noise, not to regret, but to the quiet wisdom of skin, breath, and sensation. And in that quiet, something sacred returned. The pulse of longing, not lust, longing, the human kind. To be seen, to be felt, to be whole. He didn't miss sex the way he thought he might. He missed being touched with meaning, even if by his own hand. That's what no one had told him, that your body doesn't retire from pleasure. It just withdraws when neglected. But when invited gently, it blooms again. That's why we call this stage the reawakening spiral. A phase where self-touch, done with breath, intention, and care, releases oxytocin, strengthens the vagus nerve, and lowers blood pressure. But even more, it rebuilds trust within the body. George hadn't trusted his own body for years. He thought it had betrayed him, shaking hands, stuttering bladder, a heart that fluttered too often. But the truth was, he had abandoned it first, and now it was forgiving him. One afternoon, Alina sat beside him during a break. She noticed the folded photo of Mildred on his table. She's beautiful, she said. George nodded. She was the last person to touch me like I mattered. Alina didn't look away. She reached out and took his hand, not as a nurse, as a witness. You matter now too, she whispered, even if you're the only one touching yourself. Tears welled in George's eyes, not from sadness, from truth. He no longer needed someone else to validate his aliveness. He was beginning to believe it himself. That night, he let his hands move lower, not quickly, not urgently, but with respect. Not to chase climax, but to return. And what he felt wasn't arousal. It was belonging. His body, his breath, his heart, all moving in quiet harmony. He didn't finish with tension. He finished with stillness. And when he lay back, he whispered 3 words he hadn't said in years. I feel good. George began spending more time outside. He sat in the courtyard each morning, letting the breeze brush against his skin like an old friend. He didn't bring a book, didn't scroll through memories. He simply sat and felt the way the sun warmed his chest, the way his breath moved slowly like a wave learning to rest. And most importantly, he felt inside himself. It had been years since he belonged to his own body. Now he did. He no longer saw pleasure as something tied to youth. He saw it as something tied to presence. He wasn't chasing excitement. He was remembering stillness. Intimacy no longer meant being with someone. It meant being with himself. And it made everything else better. He walked steadier, smiled easier. Even the nurses said he seemed stronger. What they didn't see was that George had begun practicing something called the receptive touch ritual. Each night before bed, he'd light the soft lamp beside him and simply tune in. No pressure, no fantasy, just slow, reverent contact with his own body. He'd start at the neck, down the arms, over the chest, sometimes lower, sometimes not. The goal wasn't climax, it was connection. And the result? Peace. Deep, full-bodied peace. Because the truth most men never hear is this: pleasure is not always sexual. Sometimes it's spiritual. When you touch yourself with care, without shame, without rush, you rewire the nervous system to feel safe again. You soften trauma stored in muscle. You remind your organs they are still loved. You sleep deeper, think clearer, feel more whole. George didn't need to be young, he just needed to be present, and he'd become more curious too. He started asking Alina questions about the science, about the nerves, about the hormones. She smiled at his curiosity. "You're becoming embodied," she said. "Embodied?" he repeated. "Yes," she nodded. "Back in your body. Most people spend their lives in their heads. You are returned to where you live." George liked that idea. He had spent so long thinking of his body as a burden. Now it felt like home. And home doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be lived in. That night he placed both palms over his stomach, took a breath, felt it rise, felt it fall. He wasn't performing, he was listening. And in that listening, he heard something extraordinary. I still matter. Not to the world, not to someone else, to himself. George didn't think he would ever fall in love again, but that's exactly what happened. Not with someone else, with himself. It wasn't the kind of love you write poems about. It was quieter, slower, the kind of love that shows up in how you breathe, in how you lay your hand on your own chest and whisper, "Thank you." For years, he believed aging meant shutting down. That desire had an expiration date. That self-pleasure was something to grow out of. That at a certain point, his body stopped deserving attention. But now he knew better. He had learned to touch himself like a friend, like a memory, like a body that had carried him through war, through marriage, through heartbreak, through survival. He no longer chased climax. He chased care, and care changed everything. The trembling in his hands softened. His afternoon naps became deeper. His laughter came quicker. Even the fog in his thoughts began to lift. And not once did he feel ashamed. He felt home. Alina noticed. "You've changed," she said one evening, wheeling in his dinner. He smiled. "I started remembering I'm still alive." She nodded, eyes kind. "You remembered how to be touched." "No," he whispered. "I remembered how to matter." You see, most men think the end of sex is the end of life. But George had learned the truth. The end of connection is the end of life. Not just with others, with yourself. That's what made his journey so sacred. We call it the embodied grace moment. It's the stage when an elder no longer seeks youth, performance, or approval, but returns to their body with reverence. And from that return, something unexpected rises. Vitality. Not energy like a young man. Vitality like a rooted tree. Steady, honest, unapologetic. George didn't die in bitterness. He didn't die lonely. He died with his hand on his chest, his breath calm, his body relaxed. He died whole. And for years before that, he lived more fully than he had in decades. Because a nurse whispered something simple, and he listened. So now it's your turn. Has your body gone silent? Have you rushed through it, abandoned it, mocked it, forgotten that it still remembers what it means to feel alive? Because pleasure doesn't have to end with age. But forgetting your body, that's what kills you first. So touch yourself, not to escape, but to return, because your body is still waiting for you to come home.